The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. "You don't get to look at me like that in the dark," Hermione said, her voice too sharp for how close he was. Draco Malfoy froze an inch away from her, his breath warm against her cheek, the sudden absence of wand light turning the space between them into something dangerous. "Trust me, Granger," he replied quietly. "If I could see you right now, I'd be standing much farther away." The dungeon door slammed shut behind them with a sound that was final in a way magic rarely was. Hermione spun around, heart hammering, and threw her weight against the iron-bound wood. "Colloportus!" she snapped, wand raised. The spell rebounded instantly, a dull thud shuddering through her wrist, as if the door itself had laughed at her attempt. Draco swore under his breath. Not loudly, not theatrically. It was the kind of curse said when something had gone genuinely wrong. The corridor beyond the door was gone. Not dark. Gone. Her wand light slid uselessly across the stone, swallowed by shadows that felt thicker than normal darkness, as though the dungeons themselves had decided to close in. "This isn't possible," Hermione said, more to herself than to him. The locking charm was theoretical. It was never meant to seal the entire lower level. Draco finished, his tone clipped, controlled. "Yes, I noticed." She turned toward him sharply. "You altered the rune sequence." "You rewrote half the board," he shot back. "I corrected it. You destabilized it. You overpowered it." They stared at each other, anger flaring bright and familiar, a reflex honed over years. But the argument collapsed almost immediately under the weight of their surroundings. The air was cold and damp, pressing in on them, carrying the faint metallic scent of old magic and stone that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. Hermione swallowed. "My wand light's fading." Draco lifted his own wand, muttered lumos, and frowned when the glow sputtered weakly, no stronger than a candle flame. "Anti-magic saturation," he said after a moment. "Residual. Whatever we triggered is feeding on active spells." Hermione's stomach tightened. "That means rescue spells won't penetrate. And shouting won't carry," he added. "The dungeons eat sound." She hated that he sounded so sure. She hated even more that he was probably right. Silence settled between them, thick and uneasy. The only sound was water dripping somewhere far below, each drop echoing too long, as if the space was deeper than it should be. "This is your fault," Hermione said finally, though the words lacked their usual bite. Draco exhaled slowly. "You were the one who insisted on staying late. Because you refused to admit your calculations were wrong. They weren't wrong. They were incomplete." He laughed then, quietly, without humor. "Merlin, you really can't stop, can you? Even now." She folded her arms, more for warmth than defiance. "If we're going to be trapped here, I'm not going to pretend this was some mutual accident." Draco took a step back, giving her space she hadn't asked for, but suddenly needed. His silhouette blurred at the edges in the failing light. "Fine. Blame me. It won't change the fact that the door isn't opening." Hermione closed her eyes briefly, forcing herself to breathe. Panic would be useless. Panic always was. "We need to assess," she said, slipping into the steadier cadence she used when things went wrong. Conserve magic. Find a stable point. There might be an older passage. There isn't, Draco interrupted. These are the lower dungeons. They were sealed off after the second expansion. Snape mentioned it once. She opened her eyes. You listened to Snape? A corner of his mouth twitched. Unlike some people, I don't assume I already know everything. The jab landed, but she ignored it. Then we wait, she said. Someone will notice we didn't leave. Draco's laugh this time was sharper. It's past curfew. Everyone assumes we're in our respective common rooms, and Snape doesn't do head counts. Hermione's throat tightened. Waiting had never scared her before. Not like this. Not with the walls so close and the darkness pressing in, and Draco Malfoy the only other living presence for what might be hours, or longer. The thought slid uncomfortably through her mind, followed by another she refused to examine. That part of her was painfully aware of him, of how near he was, of how the dark stripped away the easy markers, house colours, posture, expression, leaving only breath and warmth and the quiet shift of weight when he moved. We should sit, Draco said after a moment. Conserve energy. I'm not sitting on a dungeon floor, she replied automatically. You will be, he said, not unkindly, when your legs start shaking. She hated that he noticed, hated that he was right. They moved cautiously, backs to the wall, lowering themselves onto the cold stone. Hermione grimaced as the chill seeped through her robes. Draco sat a careful distance away, close enough that she could sense him, far enough that it felt deliberate. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time behaved strangely without light. Hermione hugged her knees, thoughts racing despite her efforts to stay calm. The accident replayed itself in her mind. The way the runes had flared, the sudden pressure in the air, the look on Draco's face. Not smug, not mocking, but startled, almost afraid. You were scared, she said quietly. He stiffened. Don't. You were, she insisted, unable to stop herself. When it happened, you weren't prepared for it to go that far. Silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, Draco spoke. Neither were you. She turned her head toward him, though she could barely make out the line of his jaw. No, she admitted. I wasn't. The honesty hung between them, fragile and strange. Another drip echoed in the distance. If this goes on, Hermione said slowly, the cold will become a problem. Hypothermia isn't common in wizards, but prolonged exposure. I know, Draco said. We'll have to share heat. The words landed with a weight neither of them had anticipated. Hermione's breath caught. That's purely practical, she said too quickly. Of course, he replied just as fast. I wouldn't assume otherwise. They sat there, not moving, both acutely aware of the space between them and how easily it could disappear. The idea of touching him, of necessity, of survival, sent a ripple of unease through her that had nothing to do with fear. The dungeon shifted, or maybe it only felt that way. The darkness seemed to deepen, the air growing heavier, as if the castle itself was settling around them, content to keep its secrets for the night. Hermione swallowed. Draco, she said, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. If we don't make it out before morning. He turned toward her fully then. Even in the dim light, she could sense the intensity of his attention, the way it narrowed in on her voice. We will, he said. We have to. But the certainty she expected wasn't there. The cold crept closer. The silence pressed harder. And between them, unspoken and impossible to ignore, something shifted. An awareness that this night, this darkness, was already changing things neither of them had meant to touch. Hermione drew a slow breath, bracing herself for what came next, knowing with sudden clarity that whatever happened in the dungeons would not stay buried there. And that frightened her more than the dark ever could. "Move closer," Draco said at last. "You're shivering." "I'm not," Hermione replied automatically, even as her teeth clicked together hard enough to betray her. He didn't argue. He simply shifted, the stones scraping softly beneath him, until the distance between them was no longer a careful choice, but a thin, unavoidable fact. His shoulder brushed hers, barely, almost politely, but the contact sent a sharp, unwelcome jolt through her chest. She stiffened. He felt it. "I'm not trying anything," he said quietly, "if that's what you're thinking." "I wasn't," she lied. Another pause. The dungeons seemed to listen. Draco leaned back against the wall, drawing one knee up. "If you're cold, you should sit like this. Less surface exposed." Hermione hesitated. Pride warred with practicality. Cold crept deeper into her bones, numbing her fingers despite her gloves. She hated that the solution was him, hated that it made sense. Slowly, deliberately, she mirrored his position. Their arms brushed again. This time neither of them moved away. The silence shifted. It wasn't empty anymore. It was crowded with awareness, the heat of his body, the faint scent of something clean and sharp beneath dungeon damp, soap, maybe, or parchment, and the way his breathing changed just slightly when she settled. "This is ridiculous," Hermione muttered. Draco huffed a quiet laugh. "You're the one who said hypothermia was a risk. I meant eventually." "Well," he said, voice low, "this dungeon doesn't seem interested in eventually." She hated that she could hear the truth in it. Minutes passed, or more. Time slipped, elastic and unreliable. The cold eased a fraction, replaced by a different kind of discomfort. An acute awareness of where his arm ended and hers began, of how close his knee was to her thigh, of how easy it would be to lean just a little more. She didn't. "Why did you stay?" Draco asked suddenly. Hermione frowned. "What?" "In Snape's classroom," he clarified. "You could have left. The experiment was over." She stared into the darkness ahead of them. "Because it wasn't finished." "That's not an answer." "It is for me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You hate unfinished things." She turned her head toward him, surprised. "You don't know what I hate." "I know you," he said, and the certainty in his voice made her breath hitch. "You hate not knowing. You hate being wrong. And you hate leaving a problem unsolved." Her first instinct was to argue. The second, to ask how he knew, never made it past her lips. "And you?" she asked instead. "Why were you there?" A pause, longer this time. "Because I didn't want you to think you were right." The honesty caught her off guard. "That's childish." "Yes," he agreed calmly. "It is." She let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. "You risked a disciplinary hearing over your ego." "I risked it," he corrected, "because you never let things go, and neither do I." Their gazes met in the dark. Not truly, not clearly, but the sense of being seen was unmistakable. "That's not a compliment," Hermione said. "It wasn't meant to be." Another drip echoed. Somewhere far above, the castle creaked, ancient and indifferent. Her shoulder ached where it pressed against him, not from strain, from awareness. "You should sleep," Draco said. "If you can." "I can't. Neither can I," he admitted. She hesitated, then shifted, just enough that her head brushed his upper arm. The contact was accidental in the way accidents sometimes weren't. He went still. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Don't be," he replied just as quickly. "It's fine." Neither of them moved after that. The darkness pressed closer, and with it came memories Hermione hadn't invited. Years of sneers, of whispered slurs, of watching him from across classrooms with a mix of anger and reluctant curiosity. She'd always told herself she hated him. It had been easy, safe. This was neither. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked quietly. "Of what?" "Of pretending." His breath stuttered. "You think I'm pretending now?" "No," she said. "I think this is the first time you're not." The words hung between them, dangerous and exposed. Draco swallowed. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," she said softly. "Enough to see when someone's afraid." He shifted, restless. "Stop." "Why?" "Because if you keep talking like that," he said, voice tight, "you're going to be wrong about me, and I can't afford that." She turned toward him fully now, heart pounding. "Why not?" His arm tensed beneath her cheek. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because if you're right," he said finally, "then this—" He gestured vaguely between them, his hand brushing her sleeve for half a second too long. "Means something." Her breath caught. "And that would be bad." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't get to want things," he said flatly. "Not things like you." The words landed like a blow. Hermione pulled back, just enough to look at him, though she could barely see his face. "You don't get to decide that." A bitter smile touched his voice. "Everyone else already has." Anger flared, sharp and sudden. "That's not—" The dungeon shifted again. A low hum vibrated through the stone, subtle but unmistakable. The air thickened, pressing in on them both. Draco's head snapped up. "Did you feel that?" "Yes," Hermione said, pulse racing. "The magic's changing." The darkness deepened, swallowing what little light remained. Draco's hand found her wrist, firm and instinctive. "Stay close." She didn't pull away. As the dungeon settled around them once more, Hermione realized with a sinking certainty that the real danger wasn't the magic, or the cold, or the night stretching endlessly ahead. It was the way his fingers tightened around her wrist, and how little she wanted him to let go. "Don't let go," Draco said, and this time it wasn't an instruction. It was a warning. Hermione's fingers curled around his wrist without thinking, the contact grounding her in a way she refused to analyze. The hum in the stone beneath them faded slowly, like a breath exhaled after being held too long, but the air remained heavy, charged, unsettled. "That wasn't normal," she said. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." They stayed like that for several seconds longer than necessary, hands locked, both aware that the immediate danger had passed, and neither quite willing to acknowledge it. When Draco finally loosened his grip, it was gradual, reluctant, as though he were testing whether the dark would punish him for letting go. Hermione flexed her fingers, the ghost of his warmth still there. "That magic," she said carefully, retreating into analysis because it was safer. "It reacted to proximity, to emotional spikes. I've read about defensive enchantments embedded into ancient structures. Some of them respond to stress," Draco finished. "Yes, I know." She blinked. "You do?" "My family has wards like that," he said quietly. "Old ones, the kind that don't care about intention, only reaction." Her stomach twisted. So, If we panic, it gets worse. They exchanged a look in the darkness, the implications settling between them. Panic wasn't the problem. They were already afraid. The problem was that fear was no longer the only thing the dungeon could feed on. "We need to stay calm," Hermione said. Draco's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. "You picked the wrong partner for that," she snorted despite herself. "You're the one who told me to stay close. For survival," he said. "Not whatever this is." "This," she echoed, heart thudding. He hesitated. "You know what I mean." Silence fell again, but it was different now, less empty, more aware. Hermione shifted, drawing her legs in closer, trying to find a position that didn't constantly remind her of where Draco was in relation to her. It was impossible. The dungeon floor sloped subtly, forcing them toward the same low point. Gravity, apparently, was not on her side. "I keep thinking," she said slowly, "that if I just erased the last rune instead of modifying it." "Stop," Draco said. She frowned. "What?" "You're doing it," he said. "Rewriting the past in your head like that changes anything. It helps me understand. It helps you punish yourself," he cut in. "And that's not the same thing." She stared at him. "You sound very sure for someone who just accused me of being wrong." "I'm sure about this," he said, "because I do it too." The admission surprised her more than it should have. "You do?" "Yes," he replied flatly. "Constantly." She turned toward him again, drawn despite herself. "About what?" His jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he would shut her out, retreat behind the familiar wall of sarcasm and deflection. Instead, he said, "About every conversation I replay and think, if I'd said less, or more, or nothing at all." Her chest tightened. "That doesn't sound like you." "That's because you don't listen when I talk," he said, not unkindly. "You listen for ammunition." The truth of it stung. "I'm listening now," she said softly. He laughed under his breath. "In a dungeon, trapped, with no witnesses. How very you." She bristled. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," he said, turning slightly so their shoulders brushed again, "that this is the only place you'd allow yourself to hear something you don't like." She swallowed. "Like what?" "Like the fact that I'm not always the villain in your story." Anger flared, sharp and immediate. "You made yourself one." "Yes," he said. "I did." The simplicity of the admission stole her breath. "You don't get to say that like it fixes things," she said, voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. "You don't get to acknowledge it after years and expect—" "I don't expect anything," he interrupted. "Least of all, forgiveness." "Good," she snapped, "because you haven't earned it." "I know." The word echoed in the darkness, heavy and final. Hermione pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to say something cruel just to break the tension. It would be easy. It always was. But the dungeon seemed to press closer when her anger spiked, the air thickening, the stone humming faintly beneath them. She forced herself to breathe. "This night," she said slowly, "doesn't erase what you've done." "I know." "But it doesn't define what happens next either," she added, surprising herself. Draco turned his head toward her. "You think there's a next?" "I think," she said, choosing each word carefully, "that if we survive this, pretending it meant nothing will be the lie." His breath hitched, just once. "And if we don't survive?" She didn't answer immediately. The idea of not making it out, of this being the last honest conversation she ever had, settled uneasily in her chest. "Then," she said quietly, "at least we didn't waste the truth." The dungeon hummed again, softer this time, like a warning acknowledged. Draco shifted closer without asking, his shoulder pressing firmly against hers now, no pretense of accidental contact. "You're dangerous, Granger." She let out a shaky breath. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you." Their hands brushed again, lingering this time. Neither of them moved away. In the dark, without eyes to betray them, Draco's thumb traced the barest line along her knuckles. A question, not a claim. Hermione's heart raced. This was the moment, the one where she could pull back, where she could insist on distance, on safety, on everything that had defined her certainty up until now. She didn't. She turned her hand, just enough to let her fingers curl around his. The dungeon was very quiet. And in that silence, something irrevocable took root, fragile, frightening, and impossible to ignore. "Viscazali, don't ask me for any clarifications. Just keep writing, but follow my rules. 1. Write according to the requirements in the disclaimer. 2. The piece should contain about 7,000 characters. The Wizarding Fanfic Author Skazal. Part 4. Lines that blur." Hermione realized she was holding his hand only when her fingers began to ache from how tightly she'd curled them. She loosened her grip slightly, a reflex born of embarrassment rather than intent. Draco noticed immediately. His thumb stilled against her skin, the faint movement that had grounded her moments before, now suspended between retreat and insistence. "If you want me to let go," he said quietly, "say it." The darkness seemed to lean in, attentive. "I didn't say that," she replied, just as quietly. His thumb resumed its slow, careful path, not tracing circles now, but lines, deliberate, restrained, as though he were mapping something he didn't trust himself to claim. The sensation sent a shiver up her arm, and this time it had nothing to do with the cold. "This is a bad idea," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She waited for him to pull away. He didn't. The air shifted again, but not with the heavy, warning hum from before. This was subtler, warmer, as though the dungeon itself were responding not to fear, but to the absence of it. Hermione swallowed. "We should talk about something else." "Like what?" "Anything," she said. "Literally anything." He considered that. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." Her breath caught. "That's unfair," he finished. "Probably, but we're past fair." She hesitated, staring into the dark, weighing the risk. Words had always been her weapon. Now they felt like a blade turned inward. "I'm afraid," she said finally, "that if I stop proving myself, people will stop seeing me." Draco's hand tightened around hers, not painfully, steadily. "That's ridiculous," he said. She laughed, brittle. "I know, but it's true." Silence followed. Then, "My turn." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I'm afraid," he said slowly, "that if people ever see me clearly, they'll realize there's nothing worth keeping." The words landed softly, devastating in their honesty. Hermione turned toward him without thinking, her knee brushing his. "That's not true." "You don't know that." "I do," she insisted, "because I'm seeing you now." His breath hitched. She felt it, felt the subtle shift of his chest against her shoulder. The realization that she could feel him at all sent a wave of awareness through her that left her dizzy. "You shouldn't," he said hoarsely. "Why?" "Because you won't like what you find." Her voice softened. "I already don't like some of it." A short, humorless laugh. "And yet?" "And yet," she repeated, "I'm still here." The dungeon creaked faintly, the sound distant and ancient, as though the castle itself were adjusting around them. Hermione became acutely aware of how close they were now, how his arm had shifted behind her, not touching her back, but close enough that the warmth radiated through her robes. "Draco," she said, testing the name again. It felt different now, less like a challenge, more like an invitation. "Yes?" "If we keep doing this," she said, heart racing, "we can't pretend it's just circumstance." "I know. And when we get out?" "If," he corrected. "When?" she insisted, then continued. "Everything will try to pull us back to where we were." He was quiet for a long moment. "You think I don't know that?" She turned fully toward him now, close enough that she could sense the outline of his face, the sharp planes softened by shadow. "Then why aren't you stopping this?" His free hand lifted, hesitated, then settled lightly against her sleeve near her elbow. The touch was tentative, restrained to the point of ache. "Because if I do," he said, "I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I hadn't." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "And that's worse?" "Yes." The honesty in his voice stripped away her last defense. She shifted closer, deliberately this time, until her shoulder pressed fully against his chest. His arm came around her then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. They sat like that, the contact both grounding and terrifying, the line between necessity and desire blurring beyond recognition. "This doesn't change the past," Hermione said softly. "No," Draco agreed, "but it changes tonight." Her head tilted, resting against him. And that might be enough. His chin brushed the top of her hair, a barely there touch that sent a tremor through her. He froze, as if realizing what he'd done, then exhaled shakily and let it happen. The dungeon was quiet now, not empty, holding. Hermione closed her eyes, allowing herself for just a moment to exist without plans or expectations, to feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing, to acknowledge the dangerous, undeniable truth forming between them. This night was no longer just about survival, and that, somehow, frightened her more than anything else. Hermione woke slowly, disoriented by warmth where she had expected cold. For a brief, dangerous moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the stone, the darkness, the sealed door. All she knew was the steady, unfamiliar comfort of an arm around her shoulders and the quiet rhythm of a heartbeat beneath her ear. Then memory returned all at once. She stiffened. Draco felt it immediately. His arm tightened for half a second, instinctive, protective, before he seemed to realize what he was doing and loosened his hold. "Sorry," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," she said quickly, though her heart was racing. "I just forgot." "Me too," he admitted. They didn't move apart right away. The dungeon remained cloaked in darkness, unchanged, as though time itself had paused to watch what they would do next. Hermione could feel the tension coiled between them, sharp and fragile, threatening to snap if either of them moved too suddenly. "How long?" she asked quietly. "No idea," Draco replied. "Long enough for you to stop shivering." She shifted slightly, becoming painfully aware of how naturally her body fit against his, how easily she'd slept there. The realization sent a flush of heat through her that had nothing to do with shared warmth. "We shouldn't get used to this," she said. "No," he agreed. "We shouldn't." Neither of them moved. The silence stretched, thick with unsaid things. Hermione's thoughts churned, circling the same dangerous realization over and over. Whatever had passed between them wasn't fading with the night. If anything, it felt sharper now, stripped of the initial shock, more deliberate. "I keep thinking," she said finally, "that once we're out, it'll be easier to pretend this didn't happen." Draco's breath was warm against her temple when he spoke. And I don't think that's true." He shifted, enough that she could feel his chest rise as he took a deeper breath. "Good." She pulled back just enough to look at him, or where she thought his face was. "Good?" "Yes," he said, "because if you could pretend, then it wouldn't have meant anything. And it does." Her throat tightened. "You're very sure of that?" "I'm sure of this," he replied. "Whatever else I'm wrong about." She hesitated. "Draco, when we leave here, the world doesn't change. People don't forget who we are." "I know," he said quietly. "They never do." She studied him in the dark, the outline of his features barely visible. "Does that scare you?" "Yes," he said without hesitation, "but not as much as the alternative." "Which is?" "Walking away from something real because it's inconvenient," he said. "I've done that my whole life." The admission settled heavily between them. Hermione looked down at their hands, still loosely intertwined. "You don't get to rewrite everything overnight." "I'm not asking to," he said. "I'm asking not to be dismissed without being seen." Her fingers tightened around his. "That's not something I do lightly." "I know," he said softly. "That's why this matters." The dungeon stirred then, a subtle vibration passing through the stone as though responding to the shift in their voices. Hermione felt the air grow warmer, less oppressive. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "Yes," Draco replied. "It's reacting again." "But differently," she said. "It's not feeding on fear." "Then what?" he asked. She hesitated. The answer felt dangerously obvious. "Connection," she said. "Intent. Whatever magic sealed us here is ancient. It doesn't distinguish between kinds of emotion, just intensity." A pause. "So, if we pull away, it might destabilize things," she finished. "Or if we push too far." Draco let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. "Trust us to be trapped by emotional moderation." Despite everything, she smiled faintly. "Figures." They shifted together, careful now, conscious of how every movement seemed to ripple outward. Hermione leaned back against the wall, and Draco adjusted with her, his arm once again resting behind her shoulders. Not holding, not withdrawing. "This is absurd," she said softly. "All of it." "Yes," he agreed, "but it's also honest." She closed her eyes, letting her head rest against the stone. "I don't know what happens after this." "Neither do I." "But you want to find out," she said. "Yes." The word was quiet, resolute. Minutes passed in companionable silence, the dungeon no longer pressing in quite so hard. Hermione felt steadier now, as though acknowledging what lay between them had taken some of its power away, enough to make it bearable. A faint sound echoed in the distance. Not dripping. Footsteps. Hermione's heart leapt. "Did you hear that?" Draco stilled. "Yes." They listened, breath held as the sound grew clearer. Voices, muffled but unmistakable, carried faintly through the stone. "Someone's coming," Hermione whispered. Relief surged through her, bright and sudden, and with it an unexpected pang of loss. This night, this strange, suspended truth was ending. Draco seemed to sense it too. His hand tightened around hers, not in panic, but in something closer to resolve. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "don't let this become another thing we're not allowed to talk about." She turned toward him, heart pounding. "I won't," she promised, "but it won't be easy." He gave a small, wry smile she could hear in his voice. "Nothing worth wanting ever is." The footsteps drew nearer, and as the darkness around them began, slowly, reluctantly, to loosen its hold, Hermione realized that escape would not free her from what had begun in the dungeons. It would only test whether it could survive the light. "Viscazali, don't ask me for any clarifications, just keep writing, but follow my rules. 1. Write according to the requirements in the disclaimer. 2. The piece should contain about 7,000 characters. The Wizarding Fanfic Author Skazal, Part 6. When the light returns." The door did not open all at once. There was first the sound of metal shifting, ancient, reluctant, followed by a thin, almost painful line of light slicing through the darkness. Hermione squeezed her eyes shut on instinct, her vision swimming as the sudden brightness cut through hours of shadow. She felt Draco tense beside her. "Stay close," he murmured, not as a command this time, but as something closer to instinct. His hand slid down her arm, fingers curling briefly around her wrist again, steady and grounding. Voices echoed down the corridor. Professor Snape's unmistakable drawl layered with sharper tones she recognized as McGonagall's. Relief washed through her, followed almost immediately by a sharp, twisting dread. This was it, the moment when the night ended. The door creaked wider, torchlight spilling fully into the dungeon and chasing the shadows back into the corners where they belonged. Hermione blinked, vision clearing just enough to see Snape's tall silhouette framed in the doorway, his expression thunderous and calculating all at once. "Get up," he said curtly. "Both of you." Hermione moved first, her legs stiff and aching from hours on cold stone. Draco rose a beat later, close enough that she could feel the brush of his sleeve as he did. The contact was brief, almost nothing, and yet it felt heavier than any touch they'd shared in the dark. McGonagall stepped forward, eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "Are you injured?" "No, Professor," Hermione said quickly. "We're fine." Snape's gaze flicked between them, lingering just a fraction too long. "That remains to be seen." The corridor outside the dungeon felt impossibly wide, the ceiling too high, the air too thin. Hermione's senses reeled, overstimulated by light and space and the sudden presence of other people. She was acutely aware of the distance now forced between her and Draco as they were shepherded out, of how easily the night's intimacy fractured under observation. They walked in silence, flanked by professors, their footsteps echoing sharply against stone. Hermione kept her gaze fixed ahead, mind racing. What do we say? What do we not say? At the junction where the corridors split, McGonagall stopped. "Miss Granger, you will come with me." Snape's dark eyes slid to Draco. "Mr. Malfoy, with me." The separation was swift and unceremonious. Draco didn't look at her as he turned away. Hermione told herself not to read into that, told herself it meant nothing. Still, her chest tightened as he disappeared down the opposite corridor. McGonagall's office was warm, fire crackling softly in the hearth. The contrast to the dungeon made Hermione's head spin. She sank into the chair she was offered, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What happened?" McGonagall asked gently. Hermione took a steadying breath. We were reviewing an advanced warding sequence in Professor Snape's classroom. The enchantment destabilized and sealed the lower dungeons. McGonagall nodded slowly. A significant miscalculation. Yes, Hermione said. It won't happen again. A faint smile touched McGonagall's lips. I'm sure it won't. You did well to keep calm. The words landed oddly, heavy with implication. Hermione wondered what McGonagall had seen when they'd opened that door. How much of the night had been visible from the outside. You're dismissed, McGonagall said after a moment. Get some rest. Hermione stood, hesitated. Professor, Draco and I... McGonagall's gaze sharpened, though her voice remained kind. Whatever occurred in the dungeons is for the two of you to reconcile. Hogwarts has a way of forcing difficult conversations. Hermione flushed. Yes, Professor. She left the office feeling exposed in a way she hadn't anticipated. The corridor outside was quiet, early morning light filtering through high windows. Hermione started toward Gryffindor Tower on autopilot, thoughts tumbling over one another until a familiar voice stopped her short. Granger. She turned. Draco stood a few paces away, his expression carefully neutral, hair slightly mussed in a way that made something twist painfully in her chest. Snape was nowhere in sight. You should get some sleep, he said. So should you, she replied. An awkward pause stretched between them, filled with everything they couldn't say here, in the open. About last night, he began. Yes, she said at the same time. They both stopped. Draco exhaled sharply. We can't talk about it here. No, Hermione agreed. We can't. Another silence, this one heavier. But we will, she added. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. You're sure? She nodded. I meant what I said. His shoulders eased just slightly. Then, later. Later, she echoed. He turned and walked away before she could second-guess herself, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Hermione watched him go, heart racing, aware of how fragile that single word was. Later could mean anything. Later could mean never. She resumed walking, the familiar staircases and portraits blurring past her. The castle felt different now, less immutable, less certain, as though a single night had shifted something fundamental beneath its ancient stones. In the quiet of her dormitory, Hermione sat on her bed without undressing, staring at the opposite wall. Exhaustion pressed in, but sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the echo of his hand around hers, heard the steadiness in his voice when he told her not to let this become another unspoken thing. The light had returned, but the dark had left its mark. And Hermione knew, with a clarity that made her chest ache, that whatever came next would be harder than the night they'd survived together. Because now there were witnesses and choices. Later came sooner than Hermione expected, and slower than she wanted. The great hall buzzed with its usual morning noise, benches scraping against stone, owls swooping overhead, conversations overlapping in a chaotic hum. Hermione sat at the Gryffindor table with her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea she hadn't touched, every nerve attuned to the opposite side of the room. Draco Malfoy sat at the Slytherin table as though nothing had happened. He laughed at something Blaise said, leaned back with careless ease, posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberate. A performance. Hermione recognized it instantly because she was performing too, nodding at Ron's rambling commentary, pretending to listen as Ginny talked about Quidditch trials, forcing herself to look anywhere but at him. It hurt more than she'd expected. "You look exhausted," Ginny remarked, eyeing her closely. "Rough night." Hermione's grip tightened on her cup. "You could say that." Ron snorted. "Studying again. You're mad, Hermione. Even McGonagall doesn't expect that much." Hermione managed a smile that felt like it might crack if she held it too long. Something like that. Across the hall, Draco's gaze flicked up briefly, just long enough to find hers. The connection snapped into place instantly, sharp and electric. The noise around her faded, the world narrowing to that single point of awareness. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the practiced ease slipping just enough to reveal something real beneath it. Then Pansy leaned in, saying something in his ear. He looked away. The moment shattered. Hermione's chest tightened, an irrational flare of hurt and anger tangling together. She knew better than to read meaning into it, knew better than to expect anything different. And yet, later doesn't mean immediately, she reminded herself. Later doesn't mean now. Classes blurred together. Charms, transfiguration, history of magic. Hermione took notes mechanically, her mind elsewhere, replaying fragments of the night in the dungeons she couldn't quite let go of. Every brush of parchment, every flick of her quill felt disconnected from the reality she'd lived only hours before. By afternoon, the strain was starting to show. "You're quiet," Harry observed as they left Defense Against the Dark Arts. "Everything all right?" Hermione hesitated. Honesty pressed at her, dangerous and tempting. "I'm just tired." Harry studied her for a moment, green eyes sharp. "You know you can tell us things, right?" "I know," she said softly. And she did. That was part of the problem. She watched Draco from a distance whenever she could, cataloguing the differences. The way he avoided certain corridors. The way his usual sharp remarks lacked their usual bite. The way his gaze seemed to flick toward her and then away, as though he were fighting a reflex he didn't trust. At dinner, she felt it again. The pull, the awareness, the unspoken tension stretching thin across the great hall. This time, when their eyes met, he didn't look away. The moment held. Her heart pounded. She could cross the room, say something, break the fragile truce of silence before it calcified into distance. She didn't. By the time Hermione reached the library that evening, the weight of everything she wasn't saying sat heavy in her chest. She chose a table near the back, away from the main aisle, and opened a book she'd read twice already without absorbing a word. She sensed him before she saw him. Draco stopped a few feet away, hesitation evident in the way his footsteps slowed. Hermione didn't look up immediately, afraid that if she did, she'd give something away. "Granger," he said quietly. Her pulse spiked. She closed the book with more force than necessary and met his gaze. "Malfoy." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The library's hush pressed in, amplifying the tension until it felt almost unbearable. "Can we talk?" he asked. Relief surged through her, sharp and disorienting. "Yes." They moved between the shelves, the narrow aisles offering a fragile semblance of privacy. Hermione stopped near the charm section, heart racing. "This isn't a good idea," Draco said immediately. She scoffed. "You didn't seem so concerned about good ideas last night." His jaw tightened. "Last night was different." "How?" she challenged. "There were no eyes," he said quietly. No expectations, no consequences. And now? She asked. Now, he replied. Everything we do will be watched, interpreted, used. Hermione folded her arms, more defensive than she meant to be. So, what are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to pretend nothing happened, he said, voice low and intense. But I also don't want to hurt you by pretending I can give you something I might not be able to. The words landed hard. You think this would hurt me? I think, he said carefully, that the way people see me would become the way they see you. Her anger flared. I don't need protecting. I know, he said, but that doesn't stop me from wanting to. The admission stole her breath. She stepped closer without thinking, lowering her voice. I didn't ask for certainty. I asked for honesty. You have it, he said immediately. I don't know how to do this without everything else getting in the way. She searched his face, seeing the conflict there, the pull toward her warring with years of habit and expectation. Neither do I, she admitted, but I don't want to go back to pretending. Neither do I, he echoed. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. Footsteps echoed at the end of the aisle. Draco stepped back at once, distance snapping into place like armor. The movement hurt more than it should have. This doesn't end here, he said quietly. I won't let it. She nodded, throat tight. Neither will I. He left without another word, slipping back into the anonymity of the shelves. Hermione stood there for a long moment, heart racing, the ache of unfinished conversation settling deep in her chest. Distance, she realized, was its own kind of test. And whatever had begun in the dark was now learning how to survive in the light, awkwardly, painfully, one fragile step at a time. Whiskazali, don't ask me for any clarifications. Just keep writing, but follow my rules. 1. Write according to the requirements in the disclaimer. 2. The piece should contain about 7,000 characters. The Wizarding Fanfic author Skazal, Part Core. The risk of wanting. The problem with pretending was that Hermione had never been particularly good at it. She told herself, as she crossed the courtyard the next morning, that what lingered between her and Draco was nothing more than unresolved tension heightened by circumstance. Darkness did strange things to people. Fear blurred lines. Survival rewired instincts. It was all explainable, containable, manageable. Her heart did not listen. She felt him before she saw him again, an awareness that sparked low and sudden, like static before a storm. Draco stood near the stone balustrade by the stairs leading down to the dungeons, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the lake, as though it might offer answers he didn't trust himself to voice. He hadn't noticed her yet. Hermione slowed, conflicted. She could walk past, pretend she hadn't seen him, preserve the fragile equilibrium they'd established. Polite distance, careful glances, words weighed and measured. She didn't. Draco, she said quietly. He turned at once, as if he'd been waiting for her voice. Whatever mask he'd been wearing slipped for a fraction of a second, relief flashing across his features before he caught himself. Granger. They stood there, the open air between them somehow more oppressive than the dungeon walls had been. Students passed nearby, laughter and conversations swirling around them, oblivious. I've been thinking, Hermione began, then stopped. Honesty surged up again, dangerous and insistent. No, that's not true. I haven't stopped thinking. Draco's mouth curved into something wry. That makes two of us. She took a breath. This, whatever this is, It's starting to feel like we're waiting for permission. His gaze sharpened. From whom? From everyone, she said. From the world. From versions of ourselves we've already outgrown. He leaned back against the stone, crossing his arms. You make it sound simple. I know it isn't, she said, but avoiding it doesn't make it safer. It just makes it quieter. His jaw tightened. Quieter things explode harder. The truth of that settled heavily between them. Draco, she said, stepping closer despite herself, lowering her voice. I don't want to do this halfway. I don't want looks and almosts and conversations that end before they begin. And what do you want? He asked. The question was a challenge, an invitation, a risk. I want, she said slowly, choosing each word with care, to find out if what happened that night was just proximity, or if it was something we've been circling for years without admitting it. His breath hitched. And if it's the second? Then we decide what to do with it, she said. Together. Silence stretched. Draco's eyes searched her face, as though looking for doubt, for hesitation, for something he could use as an excuse to pull back. He didn't find it. You know what this would mean, he said quietly. Yes. You know what people would say. Yes. You know what it would cost you, he pressed. Reputation, trust, the easy certainty of being right. She met his gaze steadily. I'm not afraid of being wrong. That did it. Something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but sharpening into resolve. Meet me tonight, he said. After curfew, the old arithmancy classroom on the 3rd floor. No one goes there anymore. Hermione's heart leapt. That's reckless. Yes, he agreed. That's the point. She nodded, pulse racing. I'll be there. The hours that followed crawled. Hermione moved through the day in a haze, hyper-aware of time, of space, of the weight of anticipation pressing against her ribs. Every clock chime felt too loud, every delay unbearable. By the time she slipped out of Gryffindor Tower that night, nerves buzzed through her like electricity. The corridor outside the old classroom was empty, dust motes drifting lazily in the faint torchlight. Hermione hesitated, hand hovering over the door handle, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what she was about to do. Then the door opened from the inside. Draco stood there, wand light low, expression intent. You came. I said I would, she replied. He stepped aside, letting her in, and closed the door softly behind her. The room was small, forgotten, lined with chalkboards etched with half-erased formulas. It felt suspended in time, untouched by the present. This feels familiar, Hermione murmured. He gave a faint smile. Funny how that works. They stood a few feet apart, the air between them charged with everything they hadn't said earlier. There were no dungeon walls now, no darkness to hide behind, just choice. This is the part where we decide, Draco said quietly. Hermione nodded. Yes. He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. If we do this, he said, voice low, there's no pretending it's accidental, no blaming circumstance. I know. And you can walk away, he added. Right now. She didn't hesitate. I won't. Something in his eyes flickered. Gratitude, fear, something dangerously close to hope. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand, giving her time to stop him. She didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek, tentative at first, as though he were still half expecting the world to punish him for the contact. Hermione leaned into the touch, heart pounding, every nerve alight. The kiss, when it came, was careful, questioning. A meeting of uncertainty and want that left her breathless. It wasn't urgent or desperate. It was deliberate, chosen. When they pulled back, foreheads resting together, Draco let out a shaky breath. "This changes things." "Yes," Hermione said softly. "It does." Outside the classroom, the castle remained blissfully unaware. Inside, two people stood at the edge of something irrevocable, fully conscious now of the risk of wanting, and choosing it anyway. The kiss did not linger long enough to become reckless. Hermione noticed that first, the restraint in it, the way Draco pulled back before urgency could override caution. His hand fell from her cheek slowly, as though separating himself from her took effort he hadn't anticipated. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The old classroom felt smaller now, the air warmer, charged with the aftermath of choice. Hermione's pulse hammered in her ears, every sensation too sharp, too present. "We should talk," she said finally, because if she didn't anchor herself in words, she might do something bolder than she was ready to face. Draco huffed a quiet laugh. "You'd think I'd know better than to kiss you without a discussion afterward." She smiled despite herself. "You're impossible." "Yes," he agreed, "but at least I'm consistent." They moved apart slightly, not in retreat, but in recognition of how fragile this moment was. Hermione leaned back against a desk, grounding herself in the solid feel of wood beneath her palms. "This doesn't exist in a vacuum," she said. "We both know that." Draco nodded. "Slytherin won't be subtle. Gryffindor won't be kind." She winced. "That's accurate." "And that's just school," he continued. "Beyond that, our histories don't vanish because we want them to." "No," Hermione said softly. "They don't." He studied her for a long moment. "You're still here?" "Yes." "You haven't tried to rationalize your way out of this?" She shrugged slightly. "I'm trying something new." His mouth curved into a faint smile, quickly tempered by seriousness. "If this becomes public, people will assume things," she finished. "About me, about you." "They already do," he said. She met his gaze steadily. "Then let them be wrong about something new." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was weighted, heavy with the knowledge that this wasn't just about attraction or even trust. It was about visibility, about choosing to be seen when hiding would be easier. Draco moved closer again, not touching her this time, just standing within reach. "There's something you should know," he said. Her heart skipped. "What?" "I don't expect this to be easy," he said. "I don't expect it to fix me, or redeem me, or make anything neat." "Good," she replied, "because I don't want neat." His brow furrowed. "You don't?" "No," she said firmly. "I want honest, and difficult, and real." He exhaled, something like relief passing through him. "Then we're aligned." A soft knock echoed suddenly against the door. Both of them froze. Hermione's breath caught. "Did you lock it?" "Yes," Draco whispered. "But that won't stop someone curious enough." Another knock, louder. "Anyone in there?" A voice called. Male, vaguely familiar. Draco swore under his breath. "We can't be found like this." Hermione's mind raced. Panic flared, and with it, the memory of the dungeon's magic feeding on intensity. She forced herself to breathe. "There's a passage behind the chalkboard," she whispered. "I saw it once in a floor plan. It leads to the west stair." Draco's eyes widened. "You're certain?" "Yes." The knock came again, impatient now. "Trust me," she said, already moving. He didn't hesitate. Together they shifted the heavy board aside just enough to reveal a narrow opening. Draco ushered her through, following close behind, replacing the board just as the door handle rattled. The passage was cramped, stone close on all sides, forcing proximity. Hermione could feel Draco's breath against her neck as they moved carefully, quietly, guided only by faint wandlight kept deliberately low. "This is becoming a habit," he murmured. She shot him a look over her shoulder. "Sneaking around?" "Being hidden," he corrected. They emerged near the west stair, the corridor empty and silent. Hermione leaned briefly against the wall, heart racing. "That was close," she said. "Yes," Draco replied, "and it won't be the last time." She turned to face him, the adrenaline sharpening her resolve. "Then we learned to navigate it." He studied her, something fierce and admiring in his gaze. "You're braver than you think." She smiled faintly. "So are you." They stood there, aware that the night was thinning, that this fragile pocket of secrecy would soon dissolve into routine and rumor. Neither of them reached for the other now. The choice to step back felt deliberate, respectful. "We'll have to be careful," Draco said. "Yes. And patient. Yes. And prepared for people to misunderstand." She nodded. "That's not new for either of us." He hesitated, then spoke softly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not asking me to be someone else," he said. "For not demanding answers I don't have yet." Her chest tightened. "Thank you for not running." A moment passed, then another. "We should go," Draco said reluctantly, "before someone else gets curious." She nodded, though every instinct urged her to stay. "Tomorrow?" He smiled, small but genuine. "Tomorrow." They parted ways then, steps echoing in opposite directions, each carrying the weight of what they'd chosen and what it would cost. Hermione climbed the stairs back toward Gryffindor Tower, with her thoughts in turmoil, heart unsteady but strangely light. Being seen, she realized, was terrifying. But hiding forever was worse, and for the first time, she wasn't facing that truth alone. By the end of the week, secrecy had become a discipline. Hermione learned quickly which corridors echoed and which swallowed sound, which staircases were watched after dinner, and which portraits could be trusted to keep their mouths shut. She learned the rhythm of Draco's schedule, when he lingered in the library longer than necessary, when he slipped away from the Slytherin table under the pretense of prefect duties, when his absence would go unnoticed for exactly 12 minutes. Draco learned her tells, the way she tucked a curl behind her ear when she was anxious, the way she straightened her shoulders before making a decision she knew would be difficult, the way her voice softened when she stopped arguing and started listening. They met in pieces of the castle that had been forgotten, a disused alcove behind the tapestry of Barnabas the Balmy, the narrow landing above the kitchens where the warmth rose through the stone, the shadowed corner of the greenhouses where the glass fogged at night. Each meeting was brief, contained, charged, an exchange of words and glances that carried far more weight than time allowed. They didn't kiss again at first. The restraint was deliberate, necessary. Every touch felt like a promise, and neither of them was willing to make one lightly. But the wanting didn't fade. It sharpened. "You're doing that thing again," Draco said one evening, watching her pace the length of the landing. Hermione stopped mid-step. "What thing?" "Thinking yourself in circles," he replied. "You look like you're trying to solve a problem that won't sit still." She let out a breath, rubbing her temples. Because this isn't just about us anymore. No, he agreed. It never was. She turned to face him, frustration flashing across her face. People are already noticing. Pansy asked me why I was in the library so late yesterday. Ginny asked if I was avoiding her. Draco's jaw tightened. And what did you say? That I was busy, she said. Which is true, just not complete. He nodded slowly. They'll push harder. I know, Hermione said, and when they do, I don't want to lie. Silence fell between them, heavy with implication. Draco leaned back against the stone, crossing his arms. Then don't. She stared at him. You can't be serious. I am, he said. I'm tired of hiding. So am I, she admitted. But this isn't just about fatigue. It's about consequences. Everything worth choosing has consequences, he replied. Her voice dropped. You'd be okay with everyone knowing? He hesitated, just for a moment. No, he said honestly. I wouldn't be okay, but I'd survive it. She searched his face, seeing the conflict there, the instinct to shield himself warring with a growing refusal to disappear. And what about me? I don't want you to pay a price for my choices, he said. That's why I've been careful. She stepped closer, anger flaring. I don't need you to decide what I can handle. I know, he said quickly, but I do need to consider what I'm asking you to stand next to. Her throat tightened. You're not asking, she said. We're choosing. The words settled between them, heavy and exact. Draco studied her, something fierce and protective in his gaze. Then choose with your eyes open. I am, she said. That's what scares me. They fell silent again, the castle's distant sounds filling the space. Footsteps below, a door closing far off, the low murmur of voices carried through stone. I've been thinking, Draco said after a moment, about the dungeons. Her breath caught. So have I. Not about the fear, he clarified. About what changed, about why it did. She nodded slowly. The magic responded to intensity, to honesty, to alignment, he said. We stopped fighting ourselves. The realization sent a shiver through her. And now, he said, we're back in a world that rewards performance. Hermione let out a bitter laugh. You're telling me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If we do this publicly, it will be harder, louder, messier. And if we don't, she countered, we'll keep splitting ourselves in half. He looked at her then, not guarded, not cautious, but searching. I don't want to be half of anything anymore. Her chest ached. Neither do I. The decision hovered, unspoken but present, pressing against them. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from the corridor below, familiar voices. Hermione stiffened. That's Ron. Draco straightened instinctively, distance snapping back into place. The movement hurt more than it should have. They'll see us, she said. Yes, he replied. They waited, breath held as the voices passed beneath them and faded. Hermione exhaled shakily. That, she said quietly, is what I mean. Draco nodded. I know. She looked at him, truly looked, at the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he maintained, the vulnerability he allowed only in fragments. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it deliberately, on our terms. A faint smile touched his mouth. Always you. And you, she asked. I'll follow your lead, he said, as long as you don't ask me to disappear. She didn't hesitate. I won't. The words felt like a vow, even if they weren't meant to be one. They stood there for another moment, the weight of choice settling into something solid, something they could stand on. Then Draco stepped back, offering her space without withdrawing entirely. "Tomorrow," he said. "Hogsmeade weekend." Her heart skipped. "That's public." "Yes," he replied, "which is why it matters." She swallowed, nerves buzzing. "You're suggesting—" "A walk," he said lightly. "Nothing dramatic, just visible." The idea sent a ripple of fear and exhilaration through her. "People will talk." "They already are," he said. She met his gaze, steadying herself. "All right." Something like relief flashed across his face. "All right?" "Yes," she said. "We'll see what happens when the light hits us properly." He nodded, expression resolute. Together. They parted soon after, each returning to their respective towers with thoughts too loud for sleep. Hermione lay awake long after the dormitory had gone quiet, staring at the canopy above her bed, heart pounding. Choice, she realized, wasn't a single moment. It was a series of steps taken in full awareness of the ground beneath your feet. And tomorrow, she would take one that could not be undone. Hogsmeade had never felt so exposed. Hermione noticed it the moment she stepped off the carriage path and into the village square. The way sound carried differently in open space, the way eyes slid toward her without meaning to, and then lingered. Laughter rang too brightly. Snow crunched too loudly beneath boots. Even the sky felt intrusive, pale and watchful. Draco was already there. He stood near the edge of the square, hands tucked into his coat pockets, posture deceptively relaxed. He looked exactly as he always did in public, composed, faintly aloof, perfectly aware of how to occupy space without inviting approach. Only Hermione knew how much effort it cost him today. She saw it in the tightness of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared as soon as he spotted her. This is real, she thought. This is happening. She crossed the square deliberately, refusing to rush. When she reached him, he didn't step closer, didn't touch her. He simply inclined his head, an acknowledgement that was unmistakable precisely because of its restraint. "Granger," he said. "Malfoy," she replied. Anyone watching would see nothing unusual. 2 students, opposing houses, polite distance. They started walking side by side toward the main street, neither speaking at first. The space between them felt measured, intentional, close enough to suggest familiarity, far enough to avoid accusation. Hermione's pulse hammered. "This was your idea," she said quietly, eyes fixed ahead. "I know," Draco replied. "If you want to turn back." "I don't," she said immediately. He glanced at her then, quick and sharp. "Good." The street grew more crowded as they passed Honeydukes. Hermione felt it then, the shift, heads turning, conversations stalling mid-sentence, the subtle recalibration of attention that came when something unexpected entered familiar patterns. Whispers followed them like a wake. "Is that... No, it can't be. Why would she..." Hermione forced herself to keep walking, spine straight, expression neutral. She'd faced scrutiny before. Being Muggle-born in a wizarding world trained you early for that. But this felt different, more personal, more deliberate. Draco noticed her breathing change. Without looking at her, he adjusted his stride, slower, steadier, matching her pace until it evened out again. 3 minutes, he murmured. "If it gets too much." She swallowed. "I can handle more than 3. "I know," he said. "That's not the point." They stopped outside a small bookshop near the end of the street. Hermione turned to face him, heart pounding, acutely aware of the fact that they were now stationary, visible from every angle. "This is the part where people start drawing conclusions," she said. "Yes," he replied. "They already are." She searched his face, looking for doubt, for regret. She found neither. "All right," she said. "Then let them." The decision settled between them like a weight released. Draco did something then that sent a ripple through the gathered onlookers. He turned fully toward her. Not abruptly, not defiantly, just enough to signal intention. Hermione felt it immediately, the shift from speculation to certainty. "You don't owe them anything," he said quietly. "Not explanations, not performances." "I know," she replied, "but I owe myself honesty." Something in his expression softened. "So do I." He lifted his hand, not to touch her, not yet, but to offer it, palm open, waiting. The world seemed to narrow to that single gesture. Hermione didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in his. The contact was brief at first, fingers curling around hers just enough to be unmistakable. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't possessive. It was deliberate. And that was what made it impossible to ignore. The whispers erupted. Hermione felt them like a physical thing, a wave of reaction cresting and breaking around them. Shock, disbelief, curiosity, outrage. She recognized the spectrum immediately. Draco's thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles, a grounding touch, subtle and steady. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at her. "You still with me?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said. The word came easily. They stood there for another moment, letting the reality settle, then turned together and continued down the street, hand in hand. The walk back toward Hogwarts felt longer than the journey out. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the whispers had become full conversations. Hermione caught fragments as they passed. Her name, Draco's, speculation layered with certainty. She didn't try to correct anything. There would be time for that. Or not. At the path where they would separate, Draco stopped. "This is as far as I go," he said quietly. Hermione nodded, though something in her chest tightened at the thought of letting go. "I know." He hesitated, then squeezed her hand once, firm, reassuring, before releasing it. The absence of his warmth felt immediate and sharp. "I meant what I said," he added, "about not disappearing." She met his gaze steadily. "Neither will I." They parted without another word, each turning toward their respective paths. Hermione walked back toward the castle with her head high, heart racing, acutely aware of every eye on her back. Inside the entrance hall, the reaction was immediate. Ron froze mid-sentence when he saw her. "Hermione, is there something you'd like to tell us?" Ginny's eyes flicked between Hermione's face and the door behind her, sharp and assessing. "I heard something." Hermione took a breath. This was it, the moment she'd been bracing for. "Yes," she said calmly. "There is." The words echoed in the stone hall, carrying weight and consequence. Whatever came next, arguments, disbelief, concern, it would be faced in the open. She thought of the dungeon then, of the dark, of the truth spoken when there had been nowhere left to hide. Being seen hurt, but hiding had hurt more. And as Hermione stood there, ready to speak, she knew with absolute certainty that she would not undo what she had chosen, no matter how loudly the world objected. "Viscazali, don't ask me for any clarifications, just keep writing, but follow my rules. 1. Write according to the requirements in the disclaimer. 2. The piece should contain about 7,000 characters. The wizarding fanfic author Skazal, Part 2, The Things That Break First. Hermione did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Yes, she said again, meeting Ron's stunned stare without flinching. There is. The entrance hall seemed to hold its breath. Students slowed as they passed, pretending not to listen while doing exactly that. Ginny's expression sharpened, her posture shifting subtly, not defensive, but alert. Ron opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "You're joking." "No," Hermione replied. "I'm not." Silence fell, heavy and brittle. Harry stepped closer, his voice low. "Hermione, what exactly are people saying?" She exhaled slowly. This was the moment she'd been dreading, not because she didn't know what she felt, but because she knew what this would cost. "They're saying I was in Hogsmeade with Draco Malfoy. They're right." Ron laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "That's not funny." "I didn't say it was." Ginny tilted her head, studying Hermione closely. "Was it just a walk?" Hermione met her gaze. "No, that did it." Ron's face flushed. "You can't be serious. Malfoy, after everything." "Yes," Hermione said firmly. "After everything." "This is insane," Ron snapped. He's... Careful," Hermione warned quietly. Ron gestured helplessly. "He's been awful to you, to all of us. He doesn't get to just... what? Take a stroll and suddenly none of that matters." Hermione's chest tightened, but she held her ground. "I'm not pretending it doesn't matter. I'm choosing not to let it be the only thing that defines him, or me." Harry frowned, conflicted. "When did this happen?" "In the dungeons," she said before she could stop herself. All three of them froze. "The dungeons," Ginny repeated slowly. Hermione closed her eyes briefly. Too late now. "There was an accident. We were trapped overnight." Ron stared at her, horror dawning. "You were alone with him all night." "Yes." "And you didn't tell us?" he demanded. "I wasn't ready," she replied. "And it wasn't just about the accident." Ginny's gaze softened slightly, though concern remained. "Hermione, did he pressure you?" "No," she said immediately. "Never." "Then why him?" Ron asked, frustration bleeding into something closer to hurt. "Why not someone who actually deserves you?" The words struck deeper than Hermione expected. She straightened, voice steady, but edged with steel. "You don't get to decide who deserves me." Ron flinched. Harry stepped in quickly. "Ron, enough!" But Ron wasn't done. "I just don't understand how you can trust him." Hermione swallowed. "I don't trust him blindly," she said. "I trust him deliberately. There's a difference." The hall felt smaller by the second. Ginny broke the tension, her voice thoughtful. "You know this is going to be hard." "Yes," Hermione replied. "For you," Ginny continued. "For him. For all of us." "I know." Ginny studied her for another long moment, then nodded once. "All right." Ron looked between them, incredulous. "All right." "I don't like it," Ginny said calmly. "But I trust Hermione, and I trust her judgment more than my discomfort." Hermione's throat tightened. "Thank you." Ron dragged a hand through his hair. "I don't have to like this," he muttered. "No," Hermione said gently. "You don't." Harry sighed, running a hand over his face. "This isn't going to stay quiet." "No," Hermione agreed. "It won't." Across the castle, Draco was learning that truth in a different way. The Slytherin common room was rarely subtle, but tonight it was sharp with attention. Draco felt it the moment he stepped through the portrait hole. The pause in conversation, the way eyes slid toward him and then away again. Pansy wasted no time. "So," she drawled, approaching with a familiar, assessing smile. "Is it true?" Draco didn't bother pretending ignorance. "What do you think?" Her smile faltered. "You're serious?" "Yes." Blay leaned forward from his seat, interest piqued. "You and Granger?" "Yes." A ripple of reaction spread through the room. Pansy crossed her arms. "You're playing a dangerous game. I'm aware. With a girl who will never fully be on your side," she added. "Not really." Draco met her gaze steadily. "That's not your decision," she scoffed. "You think this ends well?" "No," he said honestly, "but I think it ends honestly." The room fell quiet. Blaze tilted his head, studying Draco with new interest. "You're changing." Draco exhaled. "I'm choosing." The distinction mattered more than he could explain. Later that night, Hermione found him in the astronomy corridor, the high windows casting pale moonlight across stone. She hadn't planned it, hadn't even known she was looking for him until she saw his silhouette against the glass. He turned as she approached, something tense in his posture, easing when he recognized her. "Rough day?" he asked softly. She let out a breath that bordered on a laugh. "You could say that." "Ron," he guessed. "And others," she replied. He nodded. "Pansy." They stood there, a careful distance apart, the weight of the day pressing in on them both. "I don't regret it," Hermione said suddenly. "Neither do I," Draco replied at once. She studied his face, seeing exhaustion there, but also resolve. "Some things broke today." "Yes," he agreed. "Friendships will be strained," she continued. "Reputations questioned." "And expectations shattered," he added. She met his gaze. "Are you ready for that?" He didn't hesitate. "With you?" "Yes." The honesty in his voice steadied her. They didn't touch. Not here. Not now. But the space between them felt charged with something unbreakable. "What breaks first," Hermione said quietly, "is usually what couldn't hold the truth anyway." Draco's mouth curved into a faint, thoughtful smile. "Then let it break." They stood there in the moonlight, aware that the fallout had only begun, but also that whatever remained afterward would be something real. And that, for both of them, was worth the fracture. By the next morning, the castle had decided. Hermione felt it before anyone spoke to her. The way conversations shifted when she entered a room. The way silence fell half a second too late. The way curiosity pressed against her back like a physical thing. Hogwarts had always been a living place, responsive and watchful. Now it watched her openly. She walked anyway, down corridors she had known for years, past portraits that whispered without bothering to lower their voices, into classrooms where professors paused just briefly before continuing as though nothing had changed. Everything had changed. In Transfiguration, McGonagall's gaze lingered on Hermione for a moment longer than usual before she began the lesson. Not disapproval, not approval either, recognition. Hermione straightened in her seat and focused on her notes, refusing to shrink under it. Across the room, Draco did the same. They did not look at each other during class. They didn't need to. Awareness ran between them like a taut wire, steady, unbroken. It grounded her in a way she hadn't expected. At lunch, the distance became harder to maintain. Ron sat stiffly beside her, eating with more force than necessary. Ginny watched everything, eyes sharp but thoughtful. Harry remained quiet, observant, weighing something Hermione suspected went deeper than simple concern. He's going to walk in here eventually, Ron muttered. Yes, Hermione replied calmly. And you're just fine with that? I'm not fine, she said. I'm certain. That earned her a sideways look, but Ron didn't argue. Draco entered the Great Hall 10 minutes later. The reaction was immediate. Heads turning, murmurs rising. Hermione forced herself to keep eating, even as her appetite vanished. She felt him before she saw him again, the familiar pull settling low in her chest. He did not sit with her. He took his place at the Slytherin table as usual, posture composed, expression unreadable. But when his gaze flicked up and met hers across the room, there was no hesitation, no denial, just presence. The afternoon passed in fragments, short conversations, long looks, moments of tension that never quite snapped. Hermione found herself constantly balancing between engagement and restraint, between defending her choice and refusing to turn it into a performance. By evening, exhaustion set in. She escaped to the library, not to study, but to breathe. The familiar quiet wrapped around her like a shield. She had nearly convinced herself she was alone when a shadow fell across her table. "Thought I'd find you here," Draco said quietly. She looked up, heart lifting despite herself. "You shouldn't be here." "I know." He sat anyway. The library was less forgiving than the corridors, eyes everywhere, whispers sharp and quick, but neither of them moved away. The risk was deliberate. "How bad?" she asked. He shrugged slightly. "Worse than I expected. Better than I feared." She smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." He studied her for a moment. "You okay?" "Yes," she said, then corrected herself. "No, but I will be." His gaze softened. "Good." They sat in silence for a while, close enough that their elbows nearly touched. The quiet wasn't empty. It was weighted, companionable. "I don't want to lose you to this," he said suddenly. Her breath caught. "You won't." "I mean it," he pressed. "If it becomes too much, if you decide this isn't worth it, I won't hold it against you." She turned toward him fully now. "And if you decide it's too much?" He met her gaze steadily. "Then I'll tell you, not disappear." The promise settled between them, fragile and fierce. "That's all I ask," she said. A group of students passed nearby, voices low but intent. Draco leaned back slightly, distance snapping into place again. Hermione felt the absence immediately, but she understood it now. It wasn't rejection. It was strategy. Later, as curfew approached, they parted without touching, without ceremony. The restraint hurt, but it also strengthened something deeper. That night, Hermione lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the dormitory, mind replaying the day's fractures and small victories. She thought of the dungeon again, not the fear this time, but the clarity, the way truth had felt when there had been nowhere left to hide. The storm had come, and it hadn't destroyed everything. The next days tested that fragile truth. Rumors hardened into opinions, opinions into sides. Hermione lost easy conversations, gained difficult ones. Draco faced open hostility from some, wary curiosity from others. Neither of them emerged untouched, but neither retreated. They found strength in quiet moments, a shared glance across a classroom, a note slipped into a book, the brief press of fingers in a shadowed corridor when no one was looking. What survived wasn't the rush, it was the choice. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the castle adjusted, its ancient walls absorbing the new reality, making space for it as they always had. The storm hadn't passed, but something solid remained beneath it. And Hermione knew with steady certainty that whatever came next would be faced not in darkness or secrecy, but together in full awareness of the cost. One part remained, and it would decide what endured. Вы сказали, don't ask me for any clarifications, just keep writing, but follow my rules. 1. Write according to the requirements in the disclaimer. 2. The piece should contain about 7,000 characters. The Wizarding Fanfic Author Skazal, Part 15th. What they choose to keep the night. Hermione returned to the dungeons. She did not expect Draco to be there already. She felt the place before she saw him, the way the air cooled too quickly, the way sound softened as though the stone remembered what it had once held. The lower corridor was quiet, torches dimmed low, shadows stretching long and familiar. He stood near the sealed door, hands in his pockets, posture still in that careful balance between control and readiness. You came, he said, turning. So did you, she replied. Neither of them smiled. This wasn't that kind of moment. The days since Hogsmeade had been loud. Arguments, rumours, long looks that asked questions no one dared voice aloud. Hermione had defended her choice more times than she could count. Not always successfully, not always gracefully. Draco had done the same, though in a way that cost him different things. They were tired. I needed to see this place again, Hermione said quietly, before everything settles into something permanent. Draco nodded. Me too. They stood side by side, facing the door that hadn't opened on its own that night, the door that had forced honesty neither of them had planned. The memory pressed in, not sharp anymore, but steady. This is where it started, Hermione said. This is where we stopped lying, Draco corrected. She glanced at him. Same thing. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, brief and unguarded. Then it faded. I've been thinking, he said, about what comes next. So have I, she replied. He turned fully toward her. I won't ask you to make this easier for me. Her chest tightened. I wouldn't. And I won't promise you that it gets better quickly, he continued, or that I won't mess this up. She met his gaze steadily. I don't need promises you can't keep. What do you need then? He asked. The question wasn't rhetorical. It was careful, open. Hermione took a breath. I need us to keep choosing each other when it would be simpler not to. I need honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. And I need to know that if one of us falters, the other won't disappear. Draco listened without interrupting, eyes intent. I can do that, he said. Not perfectly, but deliberately. She nodded. That's all I'm offering too. Silence settled. Not awkward, not strained. Full. Draco shifted, then reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. He didn't offer it immediately, just held it between his fingers as though weighing the moment. I found this, he said. Hermione frowned. Found what? In the dungeon, he replied. After they cleared the ward. It must have fallen from your bag. He opened his palm. Her breath caught. It was her beaded handbag clasp, scratched, slightly bent, but unmistakable. She remembered fumbling for it in the dark, remembered the panic of thinking she'd lost something essential. I didn't realize it was missing, she said softly. I did, he replied, because I remember you reaching for it. The care in the admission tightened something behind her ribs. He held it out. I kept it, not because I wanted an excuse to see you, but because It felt wrong to leave part of you there. Hermione closed her fingers around the clasp, her hand brushing his in the exchange. The contact lingered, longer than necessary, shorter than she wanted. "Thank you," she said. "For the clasp?" he asked quietly. "For the choice," she replied. Something in his expression shifted. Relief, perhaps, or resolve. He stepped closer, stopping just within her space. This time, there were no shadows to hide behind, no darkness to soften the risk. "If we do this," he said, voice low, "we do it openly. No half steps, no pretending this is less than it is." Her heart pounded. "I agree. And if it becomes too heavy, we say so," she finished. "We adjust, together." He studied her face, searching. "You're sure?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I am." The moment stretched, balanced on the edge of something final. Then Draco reached for her. Not urgently, not hesitantly, but with a certainty that felt earned. His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady. Hermione stepped into him, fingers curling into the fabric of his robes. The kiss this time was different from the first. There was no question in it, no testing, just recognition, a meeting of two people who had chosen, fully aware of the cost, not to look away. When they parted, foreheads resting together, Hermione exhaled slowly. "This doesn't feel like an ending." "No," Draco agreed. "It feels like a beginning that finally knows what it's doing." They stood there for a long moment, the dungeon quiet around them, not oppressive now, but familiar, a place transformed by truth. Footsteps echoed faintly somewhere above. "We should go," Hermione said reluctantly. "Yes," Draco replied, though he didn't move right away. They turned together, walking back toward the stairs side by side, not touching, not hiding, simply aligned. At the top of the corridor, where the light grew stronger, Hermione paused. "Whatever happens next," she said, "I don't regret this." Draco met her gaze. "Neither do I." They stepped into the light together. The castle did not protest. It absorbed the moment as it always had. Ancient, patient, aware that love forged under pressure did not shatter easily. Some nights changed everything. This one had changed them. And what they chose to keep, honesty, courage, and each other, would endure long after the dungeon door had closed for the last time.